Hey, I'm JD, and welcome to another episode of Seen and Heard. Our guest today is Jenna. Welcome, Jenna. We're happy to have you on the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
You're a Danvers resident. I'm a Danvers resident. We're local kids. I mean, what's it been like for you, kind of being in the Danvers community and being someone who would be considered disabled?
Um, well, I think honestly, my biggest challenge is like my housing
Yeah.
at the time. I've lived with the elderly for the past 20 years, and
Oh, wow.
it's very I mean, it's quiet most of the time, but I can't help but feel a little isolated and that kind of a thing.
I imagine. I've come across some people who have been in that situation, but I've never been able to have a conversation with them. And I feel like
Mm.
that's a super unique perspective and one that people really just don't know about at all.
Mm.
But before we get into that, do you mind if we kind of talk about your disability itself? Like,
Oh, not at all. No.
do you mind telling us what your disability is?
I have multiple mental health diagnoses, but the big one was obsessive compulsive disorder. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Oh, absolutely.
It's an anxiety disorder. I was an early onset. Like my mother, who has a touch of it herself, she noticed it like manifesting when I was probably like 3 or 4.
Oh, okay.
So I've lived with this, my whole life. With that particular in depression, anxiety, that sort of thing.
Yeah. How does the OCD kind of like manifest for you at like mildly and like at its peak?
At its peak, oh my lord, it's been like 9 hours a day of doing rituals, like, unable to function.
Oh, yeah, locked into it.
Yeah, completely just you get locked into that cycle, and the more you do it, the more you kinda need to do it too, so it's a perpetual cycle.
I know.
Yeah.
I can imagine. I feel like I've had like maybe a tinge of that experience. So if I were to imagine cranking up the volume on that, I can feel that. I can imagine that feels very imprisoning
Oh my
almost.
god, it's very distressing when you get caught in it, and you, like, I get in this space where I just wanna stop, but I feel like I can't, because if I don't act out the compulsion, then the anxiety won't go away, but like I said, it just is a cycle.
Is it just anxiety that generates for you, or is it like a sense of, oh, if I don't do this, like something bad is gonna happen?
Yeah, that too, or I mean, it's hard to I mean, it's definitely anxiety provoking, but I mean, being an anxiety disorder, but it's not so much for me a feeling. I mean, sometimes because the way it manifests changes over the years, and it's changed for me over the years. I
Yeah.
don't get all the stuff with like hand washing or like cleanliness or a lot of this like maybe stereotypical things people might think about what OCD is. I got the more kind of mental rituals that I would have to kind of like go over and over it in my head about certain things, and then sometimes checking like a physical ritual, but a lot of mental ritualization. So a lot of people would just not understand where I was, and being kind of a weird kid. I actually was just diagnosed as being on the spectrum, on the autism
Alright.
spectrum within the past like year and a half.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, and I kind of knew that anyway, and so it wasn't a surprise to me, but it was good to have the actual like diagnosis.
And yeah, there's definitely some validation. I feel
Yeah.
like that comes with that.
Yeah.
Do you like at what point were you diagnosed with the OCD?
Well, when I was a kid, I mean, this was in the 80s, when I started seeing doctors for this, and I don't think anybody at that time really knew what they were dealing with,
No.
because it wasn't in like the public lexicon like a lot of mental health disorders. Like there's been a lot of like, in terms of medication, in terms of, behavior therapy or whatever, there's been a lot in the past like 20 years, a lot of like innovation and stuff like that. But at that time, it was I mean, I wound up being hospitalized when I was, like, 11 because
Oh,
it got
wow.
so bad that I, like, literally couldn't function.
Oh, man, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah, I mean, as that young of a kid and not really understanding what I was dealing with either, and not really able to get answers. I think I actually got the diagnosis probably in the early '90s when I would have been in, like, in high school.
Oh, okay, wow. So you were living a while with it before
Oh,
you
yeah.
really had any kind
Oh,
of
oh, yeah.
like doctor legitimize it for you to some degree.
Yeah, it was pretty scary for years, especially, like, as a younger person, really not, just trying to understand your experience as a younger person as it is, but then having to
Right.
deal with this dimension of stuff. Yeah, it was scary for sure.
The paradox of mental health to me is always like we're trying to understand the problem of our brain with our brain,
Right,
So
right.
it's like how can you really like define something with itself?
Mhm.
It's like it gets too crazy and kind of almost like like this snake swallowing its own tail or something like that,
Mhm.
you know. But yeah, the 80s, that's a crazy time too because that's part of it's like pre-ADA. So, it's like if you get diagnosed with maybe an intense mental health disorder, you could get put in like an institution or something like that. Um, so do you mind kind of talking about maybe some of the mantras or stuff that would kind of cycle in your head, or maybe some of the physical stuff you would do or experience?
Ah, well, I'll give you an example about the because I'm pretty like it's pretty much the OCD piece anyway is in remission for the most part for the
Oh, great.
due to the meds that I'm on. But the last time I had a really bad um episode of it was probably in like 2010 maybe. And it was just and I think the root of it was my fear of just being stranded and having an old clunker of a car.
Oh,
But I got into this thing where I had to like check all the fluids every day and that, like specifically because I had had this major car repair and then got nervous that I would be stranded if I didn't go out and check.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's there's no logic at work with this. It's not a logical thing.
Right, but it can snowball, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, it does. Yeah.
Yeah.
So well, like yeah, well, and I'm sure the neighbors were like, "What is she doing?" Because like living in a apartment complex, checking my car every day. But that's just like an example of like having to check things.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. So maybe they come to you and they think you're like some gearhead and they ask you to do some work on their car.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Like, oh, is your car okay? And it's like and living where I live, people are just. I live in like a cul-de-sac, so it's like it's its own little cornucopia. I mean,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
people are very curious, like especially some of the elderly people of the younger people living there. So yeah, it's yeah.
Well, speaking of being out in the public, like,
Mm.
how do you feel just generally day to day being around people? Do you think they see you differently? Do you think it's mostly an invisible disability for the most part?
Well, with a disability that's not like immediately evident when you look at me,
Right.
it's definitely a lot of I think there's just a lot of stigma around mental health stuff still, in mental health disability. Yeah, I wonder how people view me sometimes, but I try not to focus on that because like I don't know, it's like that old adage, like what people think about me is none of my business. But
Right.
but to a certain extent, there have been times where I remember being at the bank one time and just happening to sitting down with the representative and having to like tell him, oh, my check goes disability check goes into this account. He's like, oh, you don't look disabled. What's wrong with you? And I was like, are you serious? It's like
Right.
it's like, I don't think it's any of your business, but, it's just that kind of a thing with the invisible, disability. Some people I've encountered people who don't really think I'm disabled or think I'm just lazy or, that kind of an ableist attitude that I've encountered like, over the years because I've been on disability for 20 years. So
And like obviously, like I'm sure I could guess, but do you mind telling me how that makes you feel when you come across something like that?
it's frustrating. It's very frustrating. I mean, nobody knows what another person goes through if they haven't been in their shoes.
Right.
And what is applicable in one person's life is not maybe necessarily applicable in another person's life. It's just frustrating.
Okay, so you said with the OCD, you were kind of feeling that around like 3, 4-ish, like onset. So,
Yeah.
kind of what was that period of time like before you had been diagnosed? Like,
Um, when I was a kid, it was just really scary because I didn't know what I was dealing with, and some of the intrusive thoughts were really scary because there is a like and there's a whole book written by this Harvard doctor about this particular kind of OCD, which is really kind of dark, disturbing thoughts, and that's what I kind of dealt with. So I was like 10 years old and having these really just really intense, disturbing, sometimes violent, sometimes, something I knew I would never act on, but
right,
I couldn't help feel, oh, would it be possible that I would hurt somebody and I had to do this whole ritual in my head to make sure I wouldn't hurt somebody, but like knowing logically that I wouldn't hurt anybody, and it's really bizarre. And like having no like I didn't talk to anybody about it at the time because
yeah.
I didn't really know how to even articulate what was going on in my head.
So, what was like your kind of outlet for it, or did you have
Oh,
nothing?
oh no, I'm an artist. I'm a I'm a painter and I sing. I've been singing my whole life. Singing's my
Oh, hell
thing.
yeah.
I was like the theater star at DHS back in the day.
Nice.
I was a theater major in college. I didn't graduate, but I went for a couple of semesters.
So you were how early on did you kind of get into any kind of art, and what was maybe your first
Oh,
medium?
oh my God. Well, my first medium, I would just draw on like everything, pencil, paper plates. I mean, any piece of paper, I would just draw to the point where I think my teachers were really frustrated with me because I didn't want to do the work. I just wanted to sit and draw, so that and singing,
Okay.
like
And
both.
that kind of eased some of that pressure that was building inside of you from the OCD, or
Well, it certainly, I mean, singing especially always provided like a really helpful emotional outlet.
looking back on it, how do you kind of feel about your disabilities?
Um, well, I don't feel the sense of shame that I used to feel because it's not weakness, like especially like with like mental health stuff, encountering the attitude. It's like, oh, you just got to be stronger than that, or you just got to do this or that. It's like it's I don't even think it's not a moral issue, it's a medical issue, you know. So I mean, as long as I can try to, I mean, there are days, where I kind of will look at other people again, that compare and despair kind of thing, and think maybe, someone of my age should be doing this or that, but that will just drive me crazy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any good that ever really comes of that unless you're like in a competitive charity race or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But do you mind if we talk a little bit about, because you mentioned you grew up in like a retirement home or community or kind of rest home situation?
It's like regular apartments, but primarily for elderly and
Oh,
disabled
okay.
people.
Okay.
But it's primarily elderly. There's a handful, if even, of people my age, and I moved in there when I was in my 20s.
Okay.
So I've been there for a very long time. You know.
Okay. So what kind of community do you feel there?
Um, honestly, I have a couple of neighbors that I'm friendly with, but other than that, I more or less keep to myself.
Oh, okay.
Within that community. Well, like I said, it's difficult, feeling a little bit kind of isolated from other people like my age and that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you grew up with your family before then, or
Yes, yes, yes. But my family still lives in Danvers.
still is the-
Yeah, grew up in Danvers, and yeah, born.
how did they kind of handle your disabilities and stuff like that? If you don't
Well, oh no, no, that's okay. Well, my mother certainly understood like the OCD piece because
right.
she shared me some of her experiences with that too. So she definitely like understood that piece of it. Um, and from early on they were trying to get me the help that I needed, and I think it was at that, like I said before, at that time nobody in the medical field or the psychiatric field really had OCD pinned down as
Right.
like a diagnosis. So I remember being misdiagnosed as a couple of things over the years, and finally got the right diagnosis, no, right diagnoses with everything that I've been kind of dealing with.
Do you mind sharing what some of the misdiagnoses might have?
Oh yeah, no, no, I don't mind. I was misdiagnosed as being bipolar,
Oh, okay.
and what it is I think just being on the spectrum has like some definite like I don't know. I think it's a combination of being on the spectrum, probably having a little ADHD, and just it was just a yeah, I never experienced the kind of classic mood shifts that people with bipolar experience. So I don't even know exactly how I was misdiagnosed with that. I mean, it was a long time ago when I was like a teenager, but I'm glad that I got the right.
So, as far as the autism
Yeah.
diagnosis,
Mm.
what kind of led you to go get tested for that, and did it kind of create like an aha moment for you when you were diagnosed?
It did, but like I said, it wasn't much of a surprise to me because I kind of everything that I have read about it, and I've read books by authors who are on the spectrum and read about this people, from authors from a like clinician's perspective and that sort of thing. Um, I've always felt like I wanted to connect with people. I wanted to have friends. But I never quite knew how to do it. Like, I always felt socially very awkward. I always kind of like people who are on the spectrum tend to have very specific interests to the point of like not total exclusion of other things, but like I like for example, I was always very into like I would get so into the characters I would read like in a book, for example, to the point where I would, take that and kind of run with it and, draw and like, but I mean that, it was always a creative kind of outlet for me too, but just always knowing something was a little off socially. And like, the unspoken like verbal cues,
Yeah, yeah.
like
Right,
over
right.
the head, over the head. You got to be people need to be like very blunt with me and very kind of so I can know exactly what's kind of going through your head. Otherwise, I might misunderstand, and it's frustrating too because I find people um I feel people misunderstand my intentions a lot.
Probably just maybe from them getting the wrong cue from your own face, or
Possibly.
were you maybe a lot more quiet back then, or
Yeah, I mean, I'm the kind of person I'm very comfortable on a stage if I'm singing and performing, but it's like mingling with the crowd after that's when I get a little anxious.
kind of like you like the very high end of the like scale where you're like, I'm in front of people, the lights are on me, I'm singing and dancing. But other than that, like I kind of like to be on my own, like maybe doing my art or something like that,
Yeah,
or a couple friends.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I'd rather just kind of hang out with a couple of friends doing art. I have a couple of good friends. We get together. Like one friend of mine who lives in Salem, we get together like every week and we just paint for hours. It's
Oh, that's
great,
great.
And I find having somebody else doing art with me, you get that kind of like synergistic kind of energy going with another
Absolutely.
person, creative energy with, in creating in the same space with somebody else. It's yeah, good thing.
So what's some of maybe your painting themes?
Um, well, my artwork is like it's very kind of like expressionistic, but it's almost also kind of abstract. I do like a lot of portraiture, but it's like
Oh,
it's
okay.
very like abstract portraiture, and it's not. I usually don't use references. I usually paint all from
Oh, I
whatever
love it.
going on in my mind. Like if someone were to say, "Will you put like say like a bowl of fruit on the table? Like do this like hyper realistically?" I couldn't do it hyper realistically because my paintings are more. I think maybe I would miss my calling as an in animation or something because it's a very kind of like, kind of bright colors, kinda almost like comic book style.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Actually, I write comic books.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, yeah,
Nice.
I'm working on some right
Yeah.
now. But, is there, like, maybe a favorite artist of yours that you feel inspired by or would kind of compare your your style to or anything?
Well, I've heard people have said that some of my work, like, resembles Salvador Dali a little bit.
Okay.
The surreal kinda aspect of it.
Okay, yeah. And then what kinda popped into my head just from your description was a little bit of, like, Frida Kahlo.
Oh, I love Frida Kahlo, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool, cool.
yeah.
Yeah, because I was thinking, like, the colors and the abstractness, but still a portraiture, which she was very much part of,
Oh, yeah.
the portrait, self-portrait especially. So I'm gonna jump around a little bit,
Okay.
but, uh, I just wanna talk about kind of the meds you were prescribed for the OCD, kind of if you went through like trial and error with a couple different ones,
Oh god, yeah.
like what that was kind of like, how that affected you, emotionally, if you can just talk about that.
Well, I mean, I've literally probably been on every antidepressant that's been on the market for probably the past 20 years at some point. The one that I take now is called Effexor or venlafaxine is the generic name for it. But yeah, I've been on that the Effexor and I take a small dose of a drug called Abilify, which is it's I think technically it's an antipsychotic, but in small doses it can augment
Oh,
the
okay.
antidepressants. So those two drugs keep like the OCD pretty much not in total remission, but to the point where I can function.
Okay.
But I've had a lot of like trial and error over the years with different meds, and these are the only ones that really have worked.
Okay. Well, was there any like ones that really just messed you up, or
Ah,
you don't have to say like the specific ones or anything, just like how was there a pretty rocky kind of finding the right one?
yeah, like, especially when I had the misdiagnosis of being bipolar,
Oh,
I
yeah.
was put on some pretty heavy duty, like, mood stabilizers, and they did not do good things to me, like, side effect wise and all that kind of stuff.
Oh man, yeah, I
Yeah.
can imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, there's probably like an onboarding, offboarding period on those where it's like stays in your system and you kind of gotta.
Yeah, I know for like lithium, for example, you need like regular blood work, and it's you got to monitor it very closely because those can wreak havoc on your body. Some of those drugs, for sure.
Have you ever had experience with like, I don't know, maybe holistic treatments or treatments outside of like a traditional,
Oh, sure.
medical field?
Oh, yeah. I used to back when I was working, and I could afford to do this. I used to go for Reiki treatments.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're familiar with Reiki. It's
Absolutely.
yeah, okay. Yeah, no, those were great. And I also I have a medical marijuana card, so
Oh,
I do use cannabis,
I just
for sleep and what have you.
yeah, I have a lot of involuntary muscle spasms and it
Oh, okay.
shuts them right off.
Right down. Yep.
It's kind of crazy
Yep.
how quick it is. Nothing else really does that. It's also good if I have like some intense blood pressure spikes, like autonomic dysreflexia.
Oh, okay.
So it'll drop that BP
Yeah.
like no, there's no tomorrow.
Yeah. Oh no, it definitely helps with the anxiety, with sleep, with all that stuff.
So kind of talking about anxiety a little bit in your painting, like is there periods of time where you can feel like your OCD or kind of creeping into your painting, like you just like can't finish this painting, it never feels finished to you or anything like that?
I I've not really experienced that with so much with painting other than I would say not in the realm of OCD, but maybe just being a perfectionist, and just always going back to tweak something. But it's not in the kind of like OCD kind of like I don't know how to describe it, but it's definitely different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just that it feels more just like organically flowing from you. So it's
Yeah, yeah, if you're being creative and you just get in that zone,
exactly, I know exactly what you mean. So I just want to ask you, like, if you could talk to a younger version of you dealing with the OCD and stuff like that, kind of what would some advice be that you would give yourself?
Ooh.
Like I know we talked about how you have a good family and support system. Like I feel very lucky because I'm in the same boat as
Mhm.
far as that goes. So I feel like that kind of gives me some of an advantage, like where, but maybe you could not think about it as yourself younger, but like someone who might not have as good of a support system too, if that makes it easier.
Ah, well, for what I would say to my younger self is, I guess, this was never your fault. This is something that you've been dealing with since like the organic causes, who knows if it's a brain chemistry or whatever, but however it chose to however its logistical path or whatever, it's not something that I ever asked for or ever yeah, it's nothing that I it's not a failing, it's not a weakness, it's and you'll get through it, you always do, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's important to kind of say that, understand that regardless of the kind of unintended guilt and shame that can come with it, it's not your fault and you don't need to kind of carry that around with you.
Right.
Regardless of what people might say to you in life. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
when people say things like you don't seem disabled and stuff like that, like how does that make you feel? Like,
Ah, that's frustrating, or getting my favorite label crazy.
oh yeah,
Getting that one is just it's just that is just a way of easily dismissing somebody, I think, just to kinda peg them as crazy and not really know about their experience or anything, you know?
yeah, I mean, if you could maybe go into one of those interactions knowing that was going to happen, like what's something you would maybe have in the chamber ready to say?
Oh. Like, knowing somebody is going in, like,
Yeah, they might,
with that preconception?
right.
Um, I honestly don't know what I would say.
I know it's a,
It's a really tough question, and it depends on who you're dealing with too.
yeah.
You know
I mean, it's the same, with us. We're all individuals. It's all case by case. Like, you can't be like, there's no catch all for people with OCD. There's no catch all for people with a spinal cord injury.
Mhm.
Like everybody's going to require some different intervention and it's never going to be one thing, right? Like,
Right.
everything's going to be a multitude of things. And I think that's what makes us kind of complete as individuals and feel secure in ourselves. Like
Mhm.
you've got your art, you feel like you've got your meds kind of like lined up. Like I'm kind of feeling at that point right now in my life. I mean, I was paralyzed in 2017, so it's been about 7 years, almost 8 years. Um, and it's been like almost growing as a new human at that
Mm.
point. So it sucks to have that syndrome that can sometimes come with that, and like I'll deal with that even though I'm very clearly disabled. But
Mhm.
like I was wondering if you could kind of talk about your experience with like imposter syndrome and feeling that, and how people maybe saying that stuff to you can maybe exacerbate that.
Oh, it's definitely like it can be like a demoralizing thing if you think if if just feeling like you're never good enough, or
Right.
like you've never done enough, or there must have been something more I could have done, when really I think most people are just doing the best that they can to get through, disabled or no.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's yeah, the imposter syndrome thing, like it's definitely like that voice that just tells you you're not enough, or you haven't done enough.
I don't even know where it comes from.
Yeah, no, I know.
It sucks. It's like, are we born with this? Or is this something that we develop from our interactions with society, from our preconceptions? Like, my life before I was disabled, I'm a different person. I have a totally different view on disability because I have limited experience with it,
Mm.
and we all have totally different things on the inside of us. So you never know what someone's feeling on the inside. So why make that snap judgment? Well, I feel like we're kind of getting towards the end, so I
Okay.
want to ask if there's anything you feel like you wanted to share, anything I might have misspoke on, or
Um, I don't think so. I think everything. I can't think of anything specific.
sweet. So it's been really great talking to you and getting to
Right.
know you. I mean, this is our very first meeting with each other right on camera, so it's kind of funny, but kind of nerve wracking at the same time. But this has been great and like super informative for me because, my disability and experience is very physical, but obviously there's mental aspects that come with that as well, like PTSD and stuff like that. So
Mm.
I'm always interested to talk with anybody who just wants to share their lived experience because disability is such like an amorphous thing. It's such an amorphous, you know, evolving term that could really apply to anybody at any point.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh yeah.
I think we all have a lot to learn from each other. And I feel like I learned a lot from you today.
Oh, good.
So I was really happy to have you on the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So thank you everyone for joining us for this episode of Seen and Heard. We'll see you on the next one.